afternoon and welcome. My name is Pam Merkel and I'm the Coordinator of Information Technology here at the Advocacy Center. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar this afternoon. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping notes I'd like to review. The formal presentation this afternoon will last about 60 minutes. We would encourage you to ask some questions during the webinar, and we would like you to use the questions pane in your GoToWebinar viewer for that. I will give you a couple of screenshots in the next minute or so to show you where that is in case you're new to GoToWebinar. Also, the slides in the presentation have been numbered, and you can use that for reference. If there was something in particular that you want to ask one of the presenters, you might want to include the slide number in your question, and that will help them at the end of the presentation to go back to that particular content. So now, as I promised, I want you to see how to locate that that questions pane in your GoToWebinar viewer. Up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you probably will see a GoToWebinar control panel. If that is collapsed, you should use the red arrow to expand that. Once your control panel is expanded, you should see a section that's labeled questions. If that is collapsed, use the plus sign to expand that, and you'll use that questions pane to type in questions for our presenters this afternoon. One more housekeeping note. Tomorrow you're going to receive an email from GoToWebinar that will include a link to a SurveyMonkey. We really encourage you to provide us with some honest feedback about your webinar experience. It helps us to make changes and improvements. And once you've completed that survey, you will be taken to a page on our website that has a PDF that includes the PowerPoint slides from the presentation today and some other resources that are related to the topic of IEPs. So before I turn the microphone over to the presenters, we want to do a few polling questions just to get a sense for who's in the audience today. So these won't take very long, and I'm going to ask you to respond to just a couple of questions. So the first one is, what is your interest in the topic today? So are you the parent of a student? Do we have any students in the audience? Are you an educator? If you could weigh in on that and let us know. I'm going to leave the poll open for just a few more seconds. We're up to 78% of our audience has voted so far. Okay, looks as though maybe still a few more votes coming in. Okay, I think we probably have a pretty good representation. I'm going to close that and show you the results of that poll. So, and Colleen and Laura, you can see that most of our audience today are parents of kids with disabilities, which is what we would expect. Hide those results. We'll do a couple more quick polling questions. And for those of you who are parents, could you please tell us the age range of your child or children with disabilities? And if you have more than one child, choose multiple ranges that represent your children's ages. Oh, we have a good variety of this as well, so you're going to be able to perhaps address, we may be getting questions from on a variety of different topics based on this age range that I'm seeing. So I'm going to share those results, and you can see that we have parents of children in almost every age range there. Okay. One last polling question before I turn over the mic, and that is, does your child currently have an IEP or a 504 plan? Are you in the process that you've referred your child to CSE but no IEP yet? Does your child have a 504 plan? Or you're not even quite sure. Your child has something but you don't know whether it's an IEP or a 504. Okay. I'm going to leave this open for just a couple more seconds. I know the anticipation is just palpable. All right, I'm going to close that poll and share those results. So as you can see, 94% of the parents in our audience have a child who does have an IEP, and 7% have a 504 plan. So let me hide those. We're going to move on, and it's now my pleasure to turn over the microphone to our presenters, Laura Arrington and Colleen Brown.
Welcome everyone and good afternoon, and I'm so glad you have the opportunity to join us today. My name is Laura Arrington and I am a parent education specialist and trainer here at the Advocacy Center.
And I'm Colleen Brown. Hi to everybody as well. I'm the Public Education Coordinator and I provide educational workshops for parents and professionals in the community. Just waiting for my screen to show up. Pam.
Okay, Colleen, you just want to bring up your PowerPoint.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
It's me, guys.
There we go.
Okay, here we go. All right. So, yes, we are doing Individual Education Program with IEP Essentials. So we want to talk about some of the information that is going to be shared during this webinar. The purpose of the Individual Education Program will be what we're starting with, and then we're going to be going, which is the major part of the webinar, is going to be the fundamental components of each individual education program. And lastly but not least, we're going to talk about some key members of that individual education program. So I'm going to start off with some slides that begin with the background, and then I'm going to be discussing the basic definition, the reason behind the IEP, and also the intent of the IEP. So here we go. By definition, the IEP Individual Education Plan in the Part 200.1 is a written plan which specifies the special education programs and services to be provided to meet the unique educational needs of a student with a disability. So again, when I said by definition it comes from Part 200.1, we want you thinking that the IEP is always a legal document that needs to be followed. And it is always going to follow the unique need of a student with a disability. So that's where we get individual from. So it's always going to follow that child. Going on to the next slide, the IEP is the cornerstone of the special education process. And what that means, it's going to ensure a coordinated approach to address the student's unique needs, meaning one system is not working in isolation of another. So if your student has a speech language teacher and a special education teacher supporting your child, they would be working together to ensure the child is getting the appropriate support in the areas of need. So each professional is not working in isolation. They should be working together. Second component is it will guide the instruction of the student. So for instance, with my child, he was in 3rd grade but only reading at a 1st grade level. So they needed to be looking at, okay, yes, he's getting 3rd grade material and curriculum, but we need to modify it, the instruction, to the 1st grade level where he can get the information that's being shared. General education curriculum. It supports the student's participation and progress in general education curriculum. This is the goal for all students and children in school, not just students receiving special education or not just students without it. So that IEP provides and identifies the supports for the child that will need to be successful in the general education curriculum. And lastly, thinking about adult living, when we saw how many parents tuned in, I saw we had that 50% that were in that 6 to 12-year age, and we're not always thinking about adult living, but the IEP is truly guiding our children to that adult living component, because we need to really prepare our child for life after school. In school we have the entitlement program, but then out of school it means non-entitlement. So really getting the child prepared for adult living. Okay, so here we go. The intent of the IEP, basically it is the foundation for the student's program. So as the student's program rolls out, it always has to come back to what's included in the IEP for that child. FAPE stands for free, appropriate public education, and LRE, which we'll be discussing later, stands for least restrictive environment. We want to put this up there because it's the reminder of what all children are entitled to, whether they have a disability or not. Looking at strengths and needs of each individual. So it's so important to outline the student's unique strengths. The professional supporting the child will need to know both strengths and needs. Many times when the strengths are known, the professionals can use these strengths as a starting point to support the progression of learning. So for an example, if the student is strong in the social situations because he or she is liked, the teacher might provide an open forum for learning, maybe talking about current events where your child can learn from peer modeling of the other children in the classroom. They can get the speech patterns, they can understand or at least be exposed to different body language. So again, it doesn't have to be, I think sometimes we look at the IEP as being the end-all, and it's really giving the professionals that are working with your child a better understanding of your child to help progress them in their learning. The next component is vision. The IEP will reflect the vision for the future. So, for instance, there is a part in the IEP that will say, what is the goal for your child? Is it a Regents diploma? Is it a local diploma? And I want to note local diploma because only if the child has an IEP and is classified with a disability will they still be entitled to get a local diploma. And then lastly is IEP diploma. So looking at that vision, what are the goals for that child? Looking at the collaborative component, this is among all players, meaning child, parent, guardian, teacher, the supports such as occupational therapists, PT, principal, etc. So it's going to look at what important key players are in your child's life that need to be collaborating together. It's also a communication tool, remembering, yes, it's a starting point for the beginning of the school year, but at any point during the school year, come back to that. It's always that place to start when you have concerns or just something to talk about how your child's progressing and you're happy about it. So always use it as that communication tool. It also will provide the consistency from year to year. It will be reviewed annually and it can be adjusted. It will also provide that no delay of support will happen for the child as long as the child still qualifies for the special education services. It's going to clarify the resources. In the IEP, it's going to state who's responsible for what, where, when, and how often. And I need to come back to this because sometimes I know I used to think, well, I know my child's getting a speech language every day, where in reality, maybe he was only seeing that speech language teacher twice a week. So go back to that if you have a question for a certain professional in your child's life to when they'd be seeing your child, because that's going to help. And then also, it's going to measure the success. It's a tool for measuring it, which can happen quarterly and yearly. So what we're going to be doing here is I'm going to give you a quick overview of the coordinated sets of components to an IEP, and then after I discuss the evaluation piece, Laura is going to expand on each component in more detail. So, when discussing an IEP, whether it be with initial consent to evaluate or the yearly review at the Annual Committee on Special Education, the center of this process is always the child. So we always want to keep your child at the center. Sometimes that's hard to do in a meeting when you're discussing things, but if you always put your child there, it's going to be easier to work for your child. Then the appropriate program can begin with the IEP that adequately reflects the results of the child's evaluation and describes the relevant needs of the child to be addressed by the proposed program. So while keeping the child at the center, the information reviewed will begin with the evaluations. The evaluations will lead us to the present levels of performance, otherwise known as PLP. The vision will be discussed and noted in the measurable post-secondary goals. Then the annual goals will be created by what is needed to obtain the measurable post-secondary goals on a yearly basis. There could be benchmark objectives, and that will be given depending on the needs of the child. Again, Laura is going to discuss that in more detail a little bit later on. We move on to programs, services, and modifications to support the learning of the general education curriculum. We're going to keep saying that term to you over and over because we want you to remember It's the same curriculum that any child has access to, disability or not. So those modifications are going to be described and noted in the specific section of the IEP when you look at your child's IEP. Next is consideration of least restrictive environment, and that will be noted and described as well. And last and only last will placement be discussed and decided upon. So that's that circle that we're going to be really looking at for most of this webinar. So present levels of performance. We're going to start with, like I mentioned, the evaluation results. So the situation is going to vary from child to child for what evaluation results will be discussed and reviewed. In the case of an initial evaluation, the evaluations can consist of a psychological eval, a speech-language evaluation, maybe an educational eval consisting of the reading, math, and writing components. And a good evaluation should always include classwork, classroom observations, classroom tests, etc. This is kind of a new must that a lot of you parents are going to be seeing at any annual review. The next piece that would be looked at would be the student's performance on any general state or district-wide assessment programs. These are also major components that they need to look at for that evaluation piece. And finally, the team assembled would discuss any instructional implications of any and all of the evaluations. All of these together will help determine the present levels of performance of the child. Going to Laura.
Thanks, Colleen. So now we want to start looking at the 4 areas of consideration. And one of the things that I always like to remind families is that the IEP is a legal document, and that is developed and it's always reviewed annually. Regarding the IEP, it should always involve meaningful discussion about the student's strengths, learning needs, because this is going to help determine eligibility for special education services and supports. I know we keep saying this, and you're going to hear some consistent phrases throughout, but it is the cornerstone of the special education process. It should ensure a strategic and coordinated approach to addressing a student's need. It's going to help guide instruction. Again, it will help support participation in the general education curriculum, as well as addressing learning standards. And we also want it to help identify how students will prepare for adult living, and it's going to provide accountability. When we start to discuss each area, again, it's very specific to each student, and it goes back to those present levels of performance. It is an individual education plan, not an everyone education plan. So an appropriate program begins, again, with an IEP that appropriately reflects the results of evaluations and accurately describes the student's present levels. So we want to know, how does the student's disability affect their involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. So the first area that they would look at would be academic achievement. So that is a student's learning style and rate of progress, or how they learn information, retain information. And that's just one area. And we tend to think of IEPs as only being a document that supports academics. But we're going to see next it also should include social development. And that means a student's relationship with peers and adults. It means what are their feelings about themselves, and how do they adjust to school and community. The next area is physical development. So it's the degree and quality of motor and sensory development. It could affect their health. So maybe, does the student have a peanut allergy or some other type of allergy? Do they have physical skills or limitations? And how do these relate to their learning? So for example, if a student has limited fine motor skills, they may need some supports of, let's say, a laptop or a pencil grip to help support them. And then lastly is management needs. And these are educational modifications and materials to help directly assist behavioral related needs. If the student has very specific behavioral needs, and it starts to impede on their ability to learn, and they have, and we're going to talk about it, some plans in place functional behavior assessment, it would actually go under the academic because it would impede on their learning. So again, what we want you to start thinking about is the whole child. Okay. I want to give you an example because I think this is going to help you get an understanding of when an IEP is developed and we start to talk about what a present level of performance is. I'm going to give you an example and we're going to ask for some feedback. And I'm going to talk about a student named Sally. And Sally is a third grader who has difficulty with written language in reading and math. And that is Sally's present level of performance. So now we want to ask you a question. Based on that information, do you think you have a clear understanding of how Sally learns? And you can check yes or no. And I think Pam will then share the results with us.
Yep, I'm going to leave the poll open for just a few more seconds. Looks like most everybody has voted. We'll just give people a little bit more time. We're up to 90% of the people have voted. Okay, I'm going to close that, share those results.
Love those results. Good, you're listening.
Okay. I will hide those and go ahead, Laura, with your next example.
That's exactly what we wanted you to say. We wanted the majority of the people to say, I'm not sure if I don't think I do have a clear understanding. So let me read you another example and you can tell me if this is helpful. Sally is a third grader, and in written language, Sally spells at nearly a first grade level. She knows that sentences begin with a capital letter and end with a period, but she has no other consistent understanding of capitalization or punctuation. She is unable to complete a simple sentence.
Okay. Now, how do you feel about that present level of performance? If you could vote. Okay, votes are coming in steadily. I'm going to give people a few more seconds. Okay. All righty. Let me share those results with you.
Great. And you're right, that is a better understanding of how Sally learns, but I want to address the no's because I always think there's always more work to be done. There's always a better way to give more and more explanation of how Sally learns. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Sally later, and also about parents and our roles in supporting our students and when things don't make sense to us. Next, we're going to move on to measurable post-secondary goals. And what that means is it's really, where am I going? And I know it's really hard. We looked at some of the results. Some of you have younger students. You may have a 6-year-old and going, oh my gosh, I'm trying to get through today. I can't think about 16. But really, the IEP should help guide that. It should help guide them not only for this year, but it should be constantly looking forward to years to come. So what happens with measurable post-secondary goals, and think about that as life after school, it starts at age 15. And what that means, and I know it's very scary to hear when you have younger children, but it's really about the plan. What is the plan? Not only does it support your son or daughter from year to year, but it should support them long term. The goal is to support the student so that they are able to lead productive lives. Each year your child's IEP is reviewed, and you should be looking at what supports and services do they need, and how can the school support your child in meeting those needs. And it ties into their long-term goals. So if you have someone who is struggling with speech and language, it should always be looking at how do we help them now, because we need to give them the skills if they want to go to college, if they want to get a job, or what type of work or what will they do with life after school. So it really starts to identify what training and or education, unemployment, independent living skills will the student need. when you start to look at what we call a transition plan, it should be based on the students, and I really stress this, students' interest, not just what's the easiest place to put a student. And there also should be a vocational assessment of what does your son or daughter like to do. Good questions that parents and professionals should be asking. What skills does the student need to work, live, or go to college and be productive? Is there a plan in place for the student to transition to adult life? Okay. So with that comes what's called a coordinated set of transition activities. And really what that is services and activities needed to facilitate a student's movement from school, and again we call it post-school or life after school. So the school district is really responsible for doing a vocational assessment and a transition assessment. And the results of the assessment have to include your son or daughter, and it also needs to include their present levels of performance. So you can see how important that is. So part of the transition plan should include things like, do they need community experiences? Does the student need to develop self-advocacy skills? Do they need help with time management? Do they need more computer skills? Do they need independent travel skills? Can they get on a bus by themselves? Will they be able to drive a car? Can they complete a job application independently? Do they need to develop or learn appropriate work habits? All good questions and healthy discussions around supporting students transitioning. Okay. So with the measurable annual goals, we're going to talk about, it's really a statement that identifies what knowledge or skills, or maybe even behaviors, a student is expected to be able to demonstrate by the end of one school year. So it should focus on strategies and skills and knowledge that the student needs. And you should get this, you should be pulling this information from the present levels of performance. Annual goals must be measurable, observable, understandable, and obtainable within one school year. Okay, so let's go back and think about Sally, for example. So we knew Sally, based on her present levels of performance, was struggling with capitalization. Love to see a goal written around that. So an example would be, by June of 2012, Sally will be able to capitalize first and last names when writing a sentence, 8 out of 10 trials over a 2-week period. So we identified that Sally cannot capitalize, so what we want to do is then write a goal around that. And what is a reasonable goal that she is able to accomplish? Again, measurable, observable, do we understand that, and is she able to do that within one school year? The other thing that's very important when we start talking about goals is, how do parents know? And how do we report progress to parents? Well, reporting progress should be described in a language the parents and professionals can understand. It should talk about where the student is functioning so that in a year from now, the parents and the educators can determine if progress is being made. There should be a report. There should be data collected. You should receive information. Are they working on it? Are they not working on the goals? Have they achieved it? Or has no progress being made? And this needs to be reviewed. This is also going to help when you meet annually, because what you're going to want to do is update the students' present levels of performance every year. You're going to look to see if the goals were accomplished. Do they need to be changed? You might want to talk about, if they do need to be changed, maybe they weren't appropriate, or maybe more appropriate supports or services need to be provided to the student. And what we really want to share with you is that if you start to see the same goals on your child's IEP from year to year, we really encourage you to start having a discussion with the teacher and your CSE chairperson. You shouldn't see the same goals from year to year. They should be changing or broken down. And if you're not receiving information, and you should be getting progress about the same time, on a quarterly basis, that you would see report cards come out. If you're not getting this information, again, we strongly encourage you to talk with the teacher. They have to report progress to you. If your teacher doesn't have them, they should have this information in your CSE office. Okay? Okay, so now we want to know. We have a question. Do you understand your son or daughter's IEP goals? And we have yes, no, and sort of. Because I like sort of, because sometimes it feels like sort of.
And we're getting a lot of sort of. We have...
and that's why I'm glad everyone's here today.
Right. The votes are coming in steadily. I'm going to leave the poll open for a few more seconds. We're getting an interesting distribution, which I'm going to share with you here in just a second. Okay, nearly everybody has voted, so I'm going to close that poll and share those results.
Interesting, interesting. And I loved the sort of, because I am a parent as well, and I have sat in that. Well, I sort of do. So that's why I'm really glad that you're here today, because part of developing a good IEP is collaboration. And if you sort of think you may understand those goals, hopefully there can be more meaningful conversation around those goals. And if you feel that you don't understand, we really want to encourage you to set up a team meeting and talk about that. If you don't understand, maybe they don't understand as well. So I appreciate that information. Okay, so moving on. So within annual goals, some, but not all students, will have what's called benchmark and objectives. And let me explain a little bit about this. Those are for students who meet the eligibility requirement for alternative assessment. And what that means is that they are taking, instead of taking those state tests, they're taking an assessment based on their particular needs. That usually averages out to about 1% of students per district. So many students do not fall in this category. You may also see this if you have a preschooler, will have benchmarks. And what that means is it's measurable intermediate steps between the student's present level of performance and the measurable annual goal. So, for example, if you have a student who is struggling writing complete sentences and understanding how to write a complete sentence, you might have that by November, John will be able to write a complete sentence with noun and verb and adjective. But an objective may break that down into a sub-skill. So it will say, by the end of September, John will be able to underline the nouns of a sentence, or John may be able to underline and identify the main idea of a sentence. So it takes a bigger goal and kind of breaks it down into smaller pieces. Then after we talk about benchmarking and objectives, we talk about programs, services, and modifications. So what falls under those categories is that extended school year service. Again, it's students who are eligible to receive special education services during July and August. So it's really summer school. And in order to be able to qualify, New York State requires that you show substantial regression. And what does substantial regression mean? That it takes you about 8 weeks or more to recoup a skill that is lost. So during holiday breaks, February breaks, spring breaks, if you feel that your child needs those supports and services during summer, I would encourage you to talk with the teacher to make sure they're documenting regression, because it is required that they show that. Now, under services and modifications, a lot of things start to fall under those categories, and it could be a consultant teacher. And a consultant teacher could be someone who comes in and works and does direct support with your son or daughter, or they could be someone who comes in and works with a general education teacher and helps them modify curriculum. for your son or daughter. It could be an autism consultant if you qualify for one. It could be resource room. It may be a behavioral consultant. Again, all of these would need to have a justification attached to it. Also within modifications falls testing accommodations, again specific to the student's disability and needs. So do they need time and a half? Do they need flexible seating or being seated away from distractions? Do they need to leave the room to take a test in a quiet location? And this is one thing that we always encourage parents as well, that once your students get into high school and they start taking those dreaded Regents tests, that is very important to have the testing accommodations on your son or daughter's IEP, because they're going to need that when they take the Regents exams. Okay. So student needs relating to special factors. So when we say the committee, we're talking about the Committee on Special Education, needs to take a lot of things into consideration. They need to talk about what's called an FBA and PBI. So we love acronyms in special education. So FBA is a functional behavior assessment. So that's actually an assessment of if the student has behaviors that impede on their learning. It's an assessment that they do, and out of that assessment they should develop a positive behavior intervention plan. If your son or daughter has behaviors that impede on their ability to learn, that plan should be a part of their IEP. If your son or daughter has limited English proficiency, they may need the support of an English language teacher. They may need Braille. These are all different types of special factors to be considered. Do they have communication needs? And communication needs could be from an FM system, if they have auditory processing, to needing a communication device like a Dynavox. It also would look at assistive technology, and assistive technology could be anywhere from a pencil grip to a laptop. All things, it could be low-tech, high-tech. It's what does the child need and what other supports can we give the student to be successful in school. Okay. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of things, and Colleen had mentioned this earlier, and we're going to talk about what least restrictive environment is. So we've gone through a lot of different things. We've gone through goals, we've gone through programs and services, and now we're looking at what's called least restrictive environment. And really, what the intent of the law is that they want the school district to consider what school would the child attend if they did not have a disability. Okay, so we want to look, again, it's your school around the corner. What supports and services could we give the student to be successful, to be with their typical peers? I also look at least restrictive environment may be different for each student. Again, I always go back to where is the child successful? Where do they need to go? But the school is really required to show that they started in their least restrictive environment and start having conversation around, is there any other supports and services we could give the student to be more successful before we look at a more restrictive environment. And when you start to look at more restrictive environments, it's being only with disabled peers. So if they are in a general education setting, or are they in a classroom with 12 students who only have disabilities most of the day? The other thing we always like to share with parents is that schools that are standalone schools that only serve students with disabilities are actually considered one of the most restrictive environments because only students who have disabilities attend. And then the absolute most restrictive would be being on home instruction, so not even coming to school and having access to our peers. All things that have to be considered when you're developing an IEP. Okay? So we're going to, I'm going to finish up with talking a little bit about special transportation before I hand you over to Colleen. And what is special transportation? Well, it could mean a variety of things. It may be what does the student need? What other supports and services do they need to get them to school safely? It could be a large bus. It could be a large bus with an aide. It could be a large bus but with special seating. It could be a small bus. It could be a small bus that comes to the end of your driveway, or it could be door-to-door service, which means maybe your son or daughter needs extra support, so they need a bus to actually come up their driveway. It could mean that on that bus also would be a bus aide. So the school has to justify and is required to justify why a student would need special transportation. And now I will turn you over to Colleen.
So hello everybody again. Wow, Laura gave us a lot of information. Thank you, Laura. I'm ending the circle on placement. And the reason this comes very last is because it should be last. We've looked at and identified the needs and services of the child, and it always is going to be the needs and services that drive the placement. So if it is removal from the general education classroom, there needs to be a written explanation of why and a justification, kind of like what Laura just said on the least restrictive environment. So again, remembering the placement should not drive the needs and services. For some of you, I don't know if this has happened to you where a school said, well, I have this classroom, and it's almost like they're looking at what placement they have available before looking at the needs and services of the child. So kind of a nice way to think about it is special education is a service and not a place. If we remember that, and what does service mean, then we don't go to placement right away. We think about those needs that the child has, which is covered in all those nice little parts of the circle that Laura took a breath while describing for you. Yay! So there's our completed circle. There's a child in the middle. So one of the real important things we kind of wanted to close on before going to question and answer is who needs to know that my child has an IEP? The Chapter 408 of Education Law states any school professional or staff member that is responsible for implementing the IEP and or working with the students should know. So the next piece I want to say to you guys is don't make assumptions. Don't make assumptions just because it's in the law that every professional working with your child needs to read it, that they have. And I say that is we're trying to make you more proactive in your child's education. I always tried to, before school started, tried to reach out to the professionals in my son's day to make sure they had either seen the IEP or I had written a little intro of my son of like his strengths and needs to give them a better understanding of my child before the school year even began. So again, don't make assumptions, be proactive, look at the people that are supporting your child, and provide that IEP if they need it. So thinking outside the box, who might need it? It could be the bus driver. Bus drivers are the gatekeepers to our children's day. They're the first professional, so to speak, out of the family home that the student might see. How does that bus ride go? If it goes well, the day's going to start well. Another important key people are school cafeteria staff. Oh, we all love that cafeteria. Other could be aides. Does the child have a one-on-one aide that needs to know some of that information? Or those special classrooms like the gym class or art or music. Sometimes those teachers have no idea, and those are the ones where our child can flourish because it's something maybe not so academically based. So remembering, don't make the assumptions that the school has let every professional know. Be proactive, start asking. Okay, so we are going to end, Pam, right, with another polling question before we go to Q&A?
Yep. We're looking for just a little instant feedback on how you felt about the information that's been presented here today, just to give us a quick reading. And then when I close that poll, we're going to open the floor up to questions. So we're getting, the results are coming in. About half, a little more than half have voted right now. Looks like we had some pretty knowledgeable audience members. Okay, 100% have voted, so I'm going to close and share those results, and you guys can see that there's a fair distribution there. Some people learned a little, some people learned a lot, and a lot of people thought they knew some of the information, but review is good. So I'm going to look at, there's a couple questions here that I'm going to pose to you. Actually, first I wanted to share a comment from one of our audience members, Renee, that she said early in the presentation when, I'm not sure if it was Colleen or Laura was talking about, referenced the child at the center of the circle, but Renee's comment was that she always would keep the child at the center of the meeting by bringing an 8x10 picture of him to the IEP meeting. And I responded that that's a great technique for keeping the focus on the child at the meeting. And then she also had a question for you. Okay. And the question is it possible to have an IEP once a child has graduated from high school and needs supports and modifications in college?
Yeah, I'm not sure Colleen has a son in college. Would you like to take that one?
Let me take this one to start with.
Okay.
The IEP, and Laura can add anything when I finish. The IEP is the great start for the document for college, but here's the thing. Colleges want to see those psychological evaluations. They want to see the documentation that proves the child has a disability. So my input here would be, if your child is soon entering high school or is in high school, look at when his triennial evaluation is, which will mean that they do that whole new psychological evaluation again, because you're going to want that at the exit of high school. So if your triennial might be due on junior year for your child, you're going to want to be asking about that probably as a freshman or sophomore. When is the triennial scheduled? I want to make sure that's done. So that would be my word of advice. Don't just leave the IEP as the only document to get services in colleges, because a lot of colleges don't want that only. They want the psychological eval.
And I would just, I would piggyback on that to say choose your colleges very carefully. An IEP is an entitlement. It's a K through 12 entitlement. It is not a college entitlement. They do not have to follow their IEP. So some colleges do it better than others. So I think college selection can also be key in finding appropriate supports and services for your son or daughter as well.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. You guys have done a fabulous job of conveying information to the audience. Oh, hang on a second. Another question just came in. Oh, a couple questions. All right, so I think we must have spurred people on. Let me take a look at these, and I will pose them to you. My son is in college and has updated psychological testing and needs more supports. Monroe community is resistant and has little supports in place. I would like to speak with someone from your agency to help me. So feel free when the webinar is done to either call our resource line, and I'm going to give the whole number in case we have people from outside the area. It's area code 585-546-1700. You can also go to our website, which is www.advocacycenter.com, and fill out a contact us form, and we will be able to connect you individually to an advocate that should be able to help you with that situation. So let me take a look at the next question as well. How do you get the school staff to write goals that will make meaningful progress? I run into the problem where they are always trying to write goals that will not challenge the child so that they can achieve the goals. If I accept these goals, he will fall further and further behind. Okay.
I absolutely agree with that. I think sometimes what happens is, unfortunately, the system in which some schools are forced to operate is they want to, you're right, write low-achieving goals so that they can show progress. And that's where I always think a pre-CSE meeting comes in place. I think it's okay as a parent to say, I would like my son or daughter to be able to read at 40 words per minute and you have 10. So how do we get them there? How do we start working on that? If you find that the teachers are resistant to that, I would call a CSE meeting and say, I feel that these goals aren't meaningful and productive, because you do have the end result in mind, that you are your son or daughter's CEO of their education, and if we don't drive it, no one else will. So I encourage you to be assertive but not aggressive, and continue to push. Work with the teachers. If you feel that it's not being responded appropriately, I would bring that to the chairperson, because you're right. we need to be constantly expecting high expectations for all of our students, especially for our students with disabilities.
I'm going to tag team here. I think another way that I was able to get the goals, what I feel more relevant to my child's education, what I was looking for, is I had to have that one-on-one discussion with the teachers to say, this is my goal for my child. I want XYZ to happen, and these goals are not leading to that. So it comes back to that vision component that we talked about early on, that drives that post-secondary, those goals and those needs. So do think about, why do I want my child achieving at this higher level? What is my ultimate vision? Why do I think this needs to happen? And if you bring it more back to the child again, your vision, they might be more receptive to go there instead of just saying, you're not challenging my child, which, hey, I did that. So I hear, kind of when we get upset. I was one of those parents, so I get it. So
okay.
going back to the vision.
Okay, we have several more questions coming in. First, I want to just acknowledge a note from Kathy, who says her daughter is 4 years old and she has an annual review coming up in April, and says this information has been very helpful, and thank you. I'm glad that you found it informative, Kathy.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Yep, we have a question from Sherry. You mentioned the IEP as being a legal document. In what sense? And who is monitoring the school to make sure they're following the IEP? And what legally can you do if it's not being followed? And
Good. That's a good question, Sherry. It is a legal document, which means that schools are they are checked to make sure they're in compliance with making sure that they are following New York State rules and regulations. So when they're out of compliance, they are reviewed by New York State Department of Ed. They are audited. They don't want to be out of compliance, and they can be, which can be challenging. What can you do if they're out of compliance? Well, the advocate in me is going to tell you that it is the chain of command first. You want to bring it to the attention of, I would start with the classroom teacher. If they're not, and I will use an example. Let's say your son or daughter should be receiving speech therapy 3 times a week, and it's on their IEP, and they're not. The speech therapist is out on maternity leave, and they haven't replaced that. Start with the classroom teacher, go to the chairperson. The CSE chairperson, their job is really compliance. They're hired to oversee the rules and regulations of special education, and I would talk with them. If that doesn't resolve it and you cannot come to an agreement, I would say the next piece would be to call the regional associate's office, and they are located in Batavia, and each county, I believe, and district may report to different places. I apologize because I'm not in a place where I actually have access to that number, but I believe if you Google Regional Associates Batavia, New York, there is a number. They will call you back, and once you call them, they will ask you what district you're from, and they do follow up, and no chairperson wants to get a call from the regional associate. But again, I always believe in starting with what isn't going on, what's not being followed. Start with the teacher. If you have to go to the principal, go to the chairperson, and you can end with the regional associate.
Pam had mentioned.
Maybe we could include that in, yes.
what's that?
Calling our number, that 585-546-1700. Our number here for maybe.
And we would be able to give that
before that would happen. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that, Laura. We have a question from Juanita. Her daughter is in college, and she has shared the IEP on a need-to-know basis with the professionals involved. They do not seem welcome to them. How do I receive support in receiving an updated IEP review? And I believe it's Finger Lakes Community College. FLCC is clear that they are not obligated to adhere to them. Her daughter is 20 credit hours from graduation, and support has been a key. So I'm not 100% sure what her question is.
I guess I'll start with how I perceive that question,
okay.
The perception of it. Number one, the college is not responsible for providing an updated IEP or evaluations to prove the need. That doesn't fall on the college. kind of the documentation I feel they're looking for would come from an outside educational eval or psychological eval that you, the parent, would probably be responsible to pay for. And Laura, if you want to chime in here.
I agree. I agree with that 100%. It becomes much more challenging. The rules change when life after school, and it's learning to navigate the systems and trying to, I think, get people on board with supporting your son or daughter. I agree with Colleen.
And again,
I guess calling in for an advocate for that situation. We do have advocates that work with more adult age.
Yes, we do.
That might be able to help you in the direction of who could provide that evaluation if you need it, or what rights might your child have. But like Laura said, that college is not entitled. It's not entitlement. They can do whatever they want, unfortunately.
okay, thanks. Here's a question from Laurette. I'm never clear on when it's appropriate to expect the school to use, quote, expensive measures, such as a one-to-one aide or a special ed itinerant teacher in the classroom, and when the student should be sent to a special school or a special class.
Oh, that's a good question. I would say it depends. The first thing that we always need for anything is justification and documentation, especially when it comes to a one-to-one aide. You're going to need to show why do they need a one-to-one aide. Is it for safety reasons? Is it for learning purposes? Do they need a smaller setting? And I think it was Loretta, you're correct that it is hard to always understand when is it time to look at outside of the district. And again, that's, I would say, if you feel that the school has kind of thrown everything they have at your son or daughter, that you continue to, they continue to add on supports, but they still aren't making progress. And that's when it's okay to go to your chairperson and say, I'd like to look at some other options. As a parent, you have a right to look at other options and to look at other appropriate schools. And especially, I'll use the of BOCES. You need the permission of your chairperson to go look at other schools. They can't deny you that permission, but they also need to send a copy of your son or daughter's IEP to see if they would be a good fit. Because some programs may serve only students whose emotions and behaviors impede on their ability to learn, where others may maybe specifically address maybe social skills or life skills. So you want to make sure that you're going to look at a program that is going to be a good fit and can appropriately support your son or daughter. And again, if you constantly see the same goals on your son or daughter's IEP, they're not making progress, their reading levels and things just aren't coming up, I would suggest a conversation with the chairperson to say, maybe we need to look at other supports and services, or maybe a more supportive environment. Good question.
I just want to tag on that because I heard expensive come out. I know when I was fighting for my child's education, so to speak, and I wanted a different program, and they brought up monetary issues. The school district cannot tell you something costs too much. By law, they really can't bring in that monetary issue to you. That's not your concern. Your concern is your child's education. So everything Laura just said is so appropriate. But remember, if they bring up that money issue to you, again, call our resource line to ask for an advocate to talk about that, because they shouldn't be going there.
Okay, we have a question from Cindy, and I'll do my best to try to convey this appropriately. Her question is, if a school district changes the testing for reading levels since your last IEP, should the IEP be changed to show the new measuring levels? And she says, for example, reading letters to numbers. Does that make sense? I'm not sure. Do either of you have a sense for what that question is getting at?
And I'm not sure if they're talking about that the state testing, how they evaluated that is actually changed. Or some of the core learning standards have changed. I would go back to an IEP is always about each individual child. It wants to talk about where your child is at and looking at, again, goals that they could achieve within one school year. So it's hard because what we want to do is say, if my child is a third grader, I want them reading at a third grade level. But if they're in third grade and reading at a first grade level, they may not be able to jump through 2 reading levels. So you would want to, again, I guess I'm going back to, you want to go back to what does your son or daughter need? What supports and services and what goals can they achieve within one school year? And I'm not sure if that's helpful or not, or if I fully understood.
Well, I guess I want to tag in too. I'm wondering if it's something that's more of an amendment to the IEP. The IEP is a working document, so anytime during the year, as part of your child's education, you can call for an amendment meeting if something needs to be changed in the IEP, such as a service, or would it be a goal as well, Laura? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think what you could look at as far as goals is if they achieve a goal by November, you want to get back with the team and say, let's put another one on there. It's a work in progress. You should be able to go back to the table and change and update goals at any time as a team.
Okay, and I think that it answers. Cindy has chimed in with a couple more clarification notes for me, and so I think her the one that helps explain it says that my daughter's IEP states a goal of a K level. Now the school uses number measurements. So clearly she would need to be able to update that goal to reflect the rubric that they're using to measure that goal. So yes, and as you said, that they can go back to the committee anytime to be able to update those goals. So you would certainly want the goals to reflect the measurement, the tools that they're using for measuring that. So sorry for the confusion in trying to get to that, but hopefully, Cindy, we've answered that question for you. Okay, I'm going to move on to, we have a question from Debbie. What if the teacher tries to take away IEP rights to make the student more independent without consulting with the parent and school staff knows about it? I'm assuming what she's saying is that she's weaning away some of those supports that are on the child's IEP, even though they haven't yet been removed from the IEP. That's what I'm getting from her question. So, Colleen or Laura?
Amendment meeting.
Yeah.
I strongly say you got to go back to the table as a team.
Yeah.
And if the child does not need them, if they are being independent with that, that's fine. That's fine to note it. It's just, as you as a parent, do you think they are still needed and they're just trying to prove no service? I guess it depends on the child, as it always should.
Yeah, and that should be a conversation with parents to say, hey, I think that we used to have her leave for tests, but now she seems to want to stay. What do you think? That should be a healthy discussion. It should be a conversation as to, well, what do you see? What are you seeing that would support that, or how can we help, or could we try that and see what happens? I don't think you should just pull away services that are on someone's IEP without having a conversation with a parent. But if you're not giving the services or the supports that are needed, that's a challenge as well. That shouldn't be happening. Then you're not in compliance with the IEP.
Okay. I'm getting a fair amount of back and forth here with some of the past questions. I'm just going to try to, again from Debbie, this was on the removal of different services. What if they tell me changing her one-on-one is a union issue? That's
no. No.
All right.
The one-on-one is a justification. And in order to receive a one-on-one, there should be a written justification as to why. It has nothing to do with, and a one-to-one aid is not part of the teachers' union, they're a separate union, but it's not a union issue. We're looking at a student issue. So if she needs it and there is data that supports it and a justification that supports it, then she should continue to receive that service, not because the union she belongs to says she can't.
Okay, and Debbie follows up with, I think she talks about they took away a quiet spot that was desperately needed. I don't know whether that was for the student or for for the actual aides themselves, but it sounds as though she needs to work directly with her team on what her child's needs are and how best to meet those.
Yes.
And whether or not a one-on-one is part of that and should be independent of any employment issues with regard to
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Let me go back to another question. If your child has a behavior plan, this is from Roseanne. If your child has a behavior plan that the school uses, how do you get the school to include it into the IEP, and what part of the plan? All the specifics? All that's listed in the IEP are the words positive behavior supports. So it sounds as though it's not specific or measurable. So why don't you go ahead and jump in.
Yes, it has to be. It should be in the IEP. It should be under the area of the academics because, again, if you're having a behavior plan, usually your behaviors are impeding on your learning, and it needs to be more than BIP. I would encourage you to talk with a teacher and school psychologist, or at your annual review say, we need to have this plan in there. Again, anyone should be able to pick it up and understand how to support your son or daughter at school. And if they have a behavior plan, that is a very important component to supporting your son or daughter at school. So it should be under there, under the area of need, and it should be addressed in academics. And it sounds like there's not enough in there.
And if I can jump in, I don't know if you, the parent, have ever seen the plan, but that might be a step I would take too, is go to the school and ask to see the actual positive behavior intervention plan that would be in the child's records. Like Laura said, everybody should have access to that.
Okay. Here's a very specific question. Can you make changes to the IEP at your annual review? This is from Kathy.
Yes, Kathy.
Short answer.
And you can make changes anytime to an IEP by calling a CSE meeting. Now, we would discourage you from having a CSE meeting every week, but yes, it's a work in progress. Absolutely, that's the best time to do it. But if you feel the need to make changes, call a CSE meeting.
Also, like Laura had said, before annual, that pre-Committee on Special Education meeting is a great time to really discuss how the IEP should change before going to the annual.
Okay. This is back to Cindy's question. I believe it was about changing what's on the IEP to measure the reading progress, and she said, is that something she needs to request? I would think that if the school hasn't recognized it yet, it wouldn't hurt to call it to their attention that system has changed and that it needs to be reflected in the IEP, but what do you guys think about that?
Yeah. I always think it's always, if you have questions, it's always great to say, you know, when's the last time a reading assessment was done? What rate of reading is she at? What do you guys think? Do you think we should make changes? Or I feel that we need to make changes. Having a team meeting, asking for the information, asking to take a look at the information, and having a meeting before your annual review is always a great way to get things done.
Okay. I think the question may have been, does she need to actually update the IEP if the rubric they were using to measure the child's progress had changed? And my opinion on that would be, if the teacher's using the right system, it's probably not as critical to get it to worry about whether or not it's in the IEP, but make sure it's in there for the following year. I don't know. What do you guys think about it? Again, you don't want to go back to the committee every.
I think you want to know if it's impacting a goal, a reading goal for her. Yes. You would want to then update and change the goal to properly reflect that.
Okay. Make sure that the right measurement is on the goal and that the teacher is using, obviously, the measurement system that's now in place.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Hopefully, Cindy, that has answered your question. Okay. Another question from Lorette. How often should the IEP goals be evaluated?
Technically yearly. But again, they're sending you progress notes. They should come out, quarterly, and so they should be constantly looking at the goal, reviewing the goal, and seeing if they're making progress. And again, it usually has some progress. It'll say SP, it'll be A for achieved, NP, no progress made, or I think it's NW, not working on. You would want to see that. And if they're not working on goals, you would want to know if they've achieved them. You might want to have a conversation about, okay, let's make a new goal. But they are annually, but you should be receiving progress of how are they working towards making progress towards that goal. I always get concerned when parents see that you know, for three quarters, not working, achieved. And you're going, wow, that was that was fast. So if they're not working on it, maybe we could have written a better goal.
Okay, here's another question from Kathy. This may be one that she might want individual assistance with, but it's also something that perhaps members of our audience aren't even aware of. So let me just pose this. Have you heard of any parents having problems receiving mileage reimbursement for parent transport? We have it on the IEP, but are having problems with getting the reimbursement.
I can't remember if she has a child who's a preschooler.
Perhaps.
The only time you would get mileage, you might, and I think some of that may have changed, and I will tell you that I am not 100% savvy on that. If they are a preschooler, I would have you...
Yes, it is a parent.
Okay. I know you could get mileage reimbursement, but I have heard that there has been some changes. I would encourage you to contact if you live in, you would want to your county representative, because the county actually, I believe, when you're a preschooler, still, even though the services are supported through the school, I believe the county reimburses for that, and I think it may differ from county to county. At some of your meetings, there should be a county representative at your CPSE meetings. Your CSE office would be able to give you who that person, the name of that person is, the county representative, because they have to kind of approve it, because I believe they're still paying for those services. So I would say I'm not 100% sure, and it differs from county to county, so I would check that out and make sure.
Okay. We have a question, just a general question from Juanita, asking whether or not we're going to be doing more webinars on the topic of students who are transitioning from high school and to college. So we will certainly take that under advisement and think about ways that we might be able to provide information for parents and students that are in that age group and facing that transition. And then there's a more specific question from Debbie that's really very unique to her own situation. So Debbie, I'm going to encourage you to call us, and if you are in the area that we would serve from our local Rochester office, we will connect you to an advocate, and if you're from somewhere else in New York State, we can connect you to one of our core community partners who can really give you some more individualized assistance with those specific questions regarding your daughter's education and her IEP. And at this point, I'm not seeing any more questions other than those two that I just referenced, and thank you all for participating. I'm going to do a little wrap-up. Colleen and Laura, do you guys have anything more that you want to add at this point in time?
No, I thank everybody for being in the audience.
Yes, thank you for everyone for listening to us today.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let me just go back to my... Hang on a second. Sorry for the little technical glitch here. I'm going to bring up my last wrap-up here and remind people again about the SurveyMonkey link that you'll be getting in the email tomorrow. Please give us some feedback on your webinar experience, and then once you've completed that survey, you will get a link that will take you to a page that has a PDF that includes copies of the PowerPoint slides that were used for today's presentation and some other internet links to sites where you'll find information about IEPs and about the New York State Education Department. And then finally, again, I think I mentioned our website. We have actually two websites. One of the first address is www.advocacycenter.com. The other is www.specialedparentcenter.org. Both of those sites have information and resources available. They each have a calendar. The calendars would list the same events, but one of the things I want to call to your attention is another webinar that's coming up on February 9th at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The topic of that webinar is What's in Your Toolbox, Preparing for the CSE Annual Review. Colleen will be one of the presenters along with one of our other parent education specialists, Julie Buick. So we look forward to people joining us at that next webinar, and we will be planning other webinars throughout 2012, and if you are on our distribution list to get that information, you'll be seeing emails about that. So thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in the audience at a future webinar.